to recognize our new members. We have, I apologize, I'm on 2 hours of sleep, so my brain is fuzzy, but we have Jason and Danny. So welcome to the Housing Commission. You both were appointed, I think, in February, right? Yep. So excited to have you here. And then Commissioner Norris is rolling on. I think she's on. Okay. And Haley, if you wanted to say anything to the commission.
Yeah, thank you. And I won't be long. I'm not on your agenda, but I just wanted to say thank you to all of you, to county staff. I've been on the commission. I'm honestly not entirely sure. I think it's been about 6 or 7 years at this point, and I just have learned so much from every member of this commission, from previous commissions. So thank you all for the opportunity to learn from you, and thank you for your passion for serving Arlington. So excited to see what the commission continues to do, but I appreciate the chance to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Haley. It's been an honor to serve with you, and we definitely appreciate it, and we hope that you'll continue to join us at meetings from time to time, because we all know how fun they are, and at least helping out your colleague as he adjusts to life on the Housing Commission. So thank you.
Thank you.
With that, turning back to our agenda, do we have any public comment?
We have Alice Hogan, but I don't see her on. Alice, are you on?
I am, thank you. Good evening, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I hadn't heard, I should introduce myself. I'm Alice Hogan. I work with the Alliance for Housing Solutions, which is merging with NVAHA, the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance. So we are a joint nonprofit here in the Northern Virginia region, and we work on affordable housing policy development, advocacy, public education, and I especially work in Arlington. So I actually spent over a decade on the Housing Commission myself, and it's a wonderful body. So thank you all for your service. You'll probably see a lot of me. This evening, I just wanted to bring up a couple things during public comment. And one was the Arlington 2050 visioning exercise. And I wondered if your commission had been briefed on that, and hope that the commissioners will take an opportunity to get on the county's website and or send in a paper postcard that they're providing to give your feedback on what you think housing should look like in Arlington in 2050, what kind of diversity, what kind of, integrated neighborhoods, price points, walkability, all the things that we all seek and hope that in the next generation we'll see here. So just wanted to bring up that opportunity for folks. I also wanted to mention that Crystal House 6, an APA property, is going before the county board on March the 12th for a special meeting. And I didn't know if your commission was aware of that, or if you all plan to either speak or send any commentary about it. And lastly, I had sent a note, Alex, maybe you know the answer. We were wondering about, and maybe folks, I don't know if you all get this, but the county puts out a monthly list of vacant CAFs in the county where folks can see where there's a vacancy to apply. So this month there was a large number listed from Barcroft, and we were wondering if those were new that came online from a previous vacancy, but 85 was a huge number when we usually see, 1, max 10 at any given property. So I wondered about that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Ellis. Does staff have any response to Ellis's last question?
I do not have the answer to that, unless, is that Ann?
I thought I saw Ann.
If Ann knows the answer to that, otherwise I can ask Melissa, who's the Barcroft housing lead, on that and get back to you about the vacant number there. But I can get back to you on that, Alice, and obviously inform the commission on that as well.
Sure, thank you.
Great, thanks, Alice. So, and I guess just responding to your question about the 2050 visioning process. Alex, are the commissions going to have a formal role in that? I know people were invited to attend the visioning session, but I haven't heard.
I don't believe we've been contacted about that, but I can look into that and see if that's something that commissions are.
Okay. Yeah, my understanding from talking to Libby is the plan is to come up with multiple vision statements by the end of this year. Next year, have the community identify which of the vision statements there's agreement on, and then following that, then the county would start sort of like a strategic planning implementation process. But I don't know anything more specific than that. So hopefully that helps, Alice. I'm not sure that it did. But next on our agenda, we have approval of notes. There were two comments that I had, Alex, just that we ended up amending our votes for goodwill to include the revitalization designation, because we didn't originally include that in the motion. So I think just adding that in,
Sure.
amended the
It's
motion.
different.
Yeah.
Different action. Okay.
And the other one is
Doris with a comment.
on the annual work plan. You have comment about the introduce the annual report, view the annual report here. I think it should be the word.
Well, okay.
Yeah. I think that's all I had. Any other changes or edits from the commission?
This is Doris.
Hey, Doris.
Hi, I was present at the meeting, for the meeting notes.
Doris. I'm sorry, I couldn't really hear what you said. Oh. She's a liaison. I think we typically do include Doris in the notes when she attends.
And I made remarks during the meeting.
She made remarks, yeah.
You're in the notes, but you're not on the attendance at the top.
Yep. Okay, yep, we can add in Doris. Any other changes? Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, do I have a second? Thank you. Any opposition to approving the minutes? Okay, then that passes unanimously. Thank you. And who do we have virtually tonight?
For the budget item?
No, commissioners.
I think Michael Heminger is on, Sarah Rubalcava. That's all I see. Are there any other commissioners on that I didn't say? No, just those two.
Okay. Thank you. So next we have the fiscal year 2025 budget presentation from, I think, looks like CPHC first and then Department of Human Services.
Yes, so for this item, we have a very quick slide or two from Marie Randall and from Nicole Dula from the Department of Human Services. So Marie, would you like to share that slide or would you like me to share from here?
If you could share it, Alex, that would be great.
Okay.
And Alex, just point of clarification, did you ever hear back from the Office of Human Rights?
Not on the email that you sent, no.
I also did not hear back about the budget questions. Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Marie.
Wait 1 second.
Oh,
share.
Okay.
1 second, Marie.
All right.
Sorry, got you excited about presenting. And then...
All right,
Great.
there you
Thanks, Alex. So good evening. My name is Marie Randall. I'm the Finance Supervisor for the Housing Division. And we thought we would give you a summary of information that was provided by the County Manager to the Board when he presented the proposed budget for the 2025 fiscal year a few weeks ago. I will just put a plug in that the budget work session is next Thursday, March 14th, and it's combined with the Department of Human Services. So I highly encourage you to watch live or watch the recorded version, since it's very helpful to listen to the commentary as well as the questions asked by the board. So as a summary of the proposed budget, it focuses on affordable housing, the environment, and the county's workforce. Specifically, the investments in housing, as shown on the slide. It is noted that affordable housing remains one of the county's greatest challenges, with many residents facing rising housing costs coupled with housing supply shortfalls. So to address this, the proposed budget includes $110 million, about 8% of the county's budget, for investments in affordable housing. So this is just part of it. Nicole will talk about the other part. This includes $20.5 million in funding, of which $10.5 million is ongoing. So that's the AHIF, the 9.7, plus the $800,000 in federal home funds. There is $10 million in one-time funding. And this is a $5.2 million increase from last year, from FY 2024. This also includes $15 million for Barcroft debt paydown or buy down, as well as $2 million from the Columbia Pike TIF. So that's about it for all I have. The slide shows all of that, plus some other sources, such as developer contributions and loan repayments and payoffs that we've been receiving this year. And then it shows the debt service payments below that we will be making, as well as the line of credit payment, and then what is potentially available additional funding after that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next up, we have Nicole.
And Nicole, I'm not sure if you have anything to share out further than Kellen's handout with the DHS budget that was sent prior to the meeting.
Yeah, if I could, I'll take control. I'll share. I've got a few slides.
Awesome.
Making sure everyone can see those.
Yep.
See the screen? Okay, perfect. So similar to Marie, our work session is next week. So this is just a very short teaser of what's to come. Our department director, Anita Friedman, will go into a lot more detail. So one of the FY25 priorities in the county manager's proposed budget is the continued commitment to racial equity. So with a strategic review of services targeted at those most burdened and vulnerable in need of our support. So of that 110 million of the overall proposed budget is in direct housing investment, with an emphasis on stabilizing Arlington households, improving housing conditions. And these investments do largely serve our BIPOC neighbors and residents. Our largest locally funded housing program, Housing Grants, is included. So there's an ongoing commitment to support the county's program, directly serving seniors that are 65 and older, our working families with minor children, and our disabled residents. You're going to hear a lot more about Housing Grants in the next item on the agenda. There is $3.1 million that has been added to the FY25 budget as an ongoing supplemental to total the Housing Grants base budget of now $15 million. 97% of our participants reside in CAPS, so we continue to serve the most vulnerable that are at the lower income spectrum, where they are 88% have incomes less than 30% of the area median income. Our average projected grant for FY25 price point is around $760. We are anticipating a continual increase in the program as we'll continue to adjust our maximum allowable rents, which I'll show you on the next slide. So as the housing grant program continues to grow in terms of participation, we need the additional staffing to support the work. It's an open program, applications flow in daily. So there's also been an added of 2 FTE housing specialists that have been added in the proposed budget. And then here's the maximum allowable rents. For those of you who have been along the housing grant trail for a number of years, there was a point in time where our maximum allowable rents were pretty much static for 10 years. This county manager has made a commitment to continue to increase the index point for the maximum allowable rents in the program so that the grants can remain competitive with the market. So we will, baked into that 15 million is also an increase of our MARS up to the 60% in area median income. Next slide here is just also our housing choice voucher program. Arlington County is recognized by HUD as a public housing authority. So we administer federally funded rental assistance vouchers. This program is a major contributor in providing a housing subsidy resource and opportunities to Arlingtons that are also lower income. Not only in Arlington, but also this program stretches beyond our jurisdictions. So in FY25, we do project the average subsidy will be $1,335. The actual cost to run the housing choice voucher program in terms of just financial, the rental assistance is over $24.4 million. And continued commitment to serving our most vulnerable, the Housing Choice Voucher Program does mandate that the program admit 75% of participants have to be at 30% area median income and below. So again, this is a critical resource that we are able to continue to grow and provide in the community. And you'll hear more about permanent supportive housing. In the budget, the total proposed is over 5.7 million. Permanent supportive housing provides direct subsidy rental assistance as well as supportive housing services for our disabled residents in the community. It is a combination of state, federal, and local funding for this program. It is highly regarded by the state, so we're pleased that we can continue to grow this program through our state-funded resources. Some of the successes here that I just like to highlight in terms of how successful the program is, the average tenure of our participants is about 5.3 years in the program. Overall, we have 38% of our participants have been in a permanent supportive housing placement, scattered site in the community longer than 6 years. Our retention rates continue to remain high at 90%, and there is still a high demand for the program. So in FY25, we do project to serve at least 382 households. And then finally, eviction prevention. So this is a program that's actually operated through DHS's Community Assistance Bureau and the Economic Independence Division. Our eviction prevention resources have been sort of the highlight of need and meeting needs of our residents, particularly through the pandemic crisis. Right now, there's a projected budget for FY25 will be, $2.3 million, and this time in ongoing funding. So you'll note that this is an increase from our baseline budget. With this, because of the demand, particularly since the statewide rent relief portals have closed, there are still households that remain in need. The ongoing casework and the service to the community requires additional intake staff. So also within the county manager's proposed budget, there's 2.0 FTE positions that have been added. And just a teaser, once again, our budget work session is next week at 3 to 6 p.m.
Thanks, Nicole. And now public comment on the topic.
Alice, you're up.
Good evening, me again. Thank you, staff, for the presentation. I mean, I guess we would say overall, it's a very good budget for housing this year. I feel really lucky. And it's wonderful to see that staff at the highest levels really realize the priority this needs to be to keep people housed who are still bouncing back from COVID. A few comments I wanted to make. I know you'll go over Kellen's review of the budget. Kellen, that was excellent. Thank you for making that available. The only things I would add for you all to consider is the tax rate. So the tax rate right now in the proposed budget is 1.5 cents on every $100. And then the the county board just advertised it to be up to 2.5 cents. So a whole penny more. And this is really unusual. It's been flat for a few years. So, maybe something for you all to consider. What could happen with that extra penny is that could be the basis for finally, identifying and securing a permanent funding source for the AHIF, Affordable Housing Investment Fund, where every year we're watching the budget and waiting to see what will be the ongoing and what will be the one-time funds and then any leftover ones. And we're, getting it all together and hoping it's enough for that year. It never is enough. And as we saw, in the past, there's no guarantee that we continue to fund in an upward manner. We actually lost ground last year. So where we need, around $50 million a year to truly achieve all of the CAFs that are part of our goals with the Affordable Housing Master Plan, we're usually getting 15, and now this year for the first time 20 million. So it's far short of what we need, and every year we're scrambling for it. So the idea of having some sort of baseline, which might provide $8 or $12 million as a flat amount to then work from within the annual budgets, would be really wonderful for the program, and it would also stabilize some of our affordable housing providers who are looking to see what is the budget a few years out and not knowing whether or not there'll be money there for them to apply for is a lot of why they're looking in other jurisdictions to build. So that might be something to consider. I also just wanted to mention, as Nicole did, that next week anyone can testify. Oh, no, next week is the hearing. We listen. But in April, on April 2nd is the budget hearing, and April 4th, the tax hearing. Any Arlingtonian can speak there, so you don't have to just allow housing commissioners, one voice. Anyone can do that or email them at any point. And the last thing I wanted to just mention was planning staff is down too. And that's East Falls Church and other important planning efforts that we need to move forward to have places to put our CAFs. So that might be another area where you might consider mentioning to the board. So thank you.
Thanks, Alice. That's it for public comment on the budget, correct? Nicole, I did have a question for you on the eviction prevention. I think your slide had said that it was 2.3 million in ongoing funds. What I had was 2.3 million overall funding with only 1.6 million in ongoing funds. Can you confirm that your slide was more accurate than what I had in my analysis? You're on mute, sorry.
And I'm dealing with a dying mouse over here, so I'm so sorry. It's taking me a little long. It's 2.3 million ongoing. I'll have to look at your document again.
Okay.
I think I might have caught that and adjusted it. at the 11th hour.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification.
Probably.
And when you said dealing with a dying mouse, I was thinking animal, not computer mouse. And I was like, yeah.
Strange thing to be dealing with.
Yep. It's like, well, have
It's
fun with
throwing a temper tantrum on me tonight, guys. Sorry.
So just for the commission, I think this is the second year in a row that I put together sort of this analysis. So coming through the budget, looking at all the housing related funding items, and then working with staff to get clarification on things that were unclear or I had questions about, or in some cases where I got it wrong. So I do want to thank Nicole and staff for being responsive and meeting with me and sending me back feedback to make sure this was as accurate as it could be, although we see that there's still a thing that I missed. But I wanted to give folks sort of that historical analysis too, of looking at the last 2 fiscal years in comparison to the proposed funding levels for FY25, as well as some additional information about like either how the funds would be used or some context around that. And then some draft recommendations. So a lot of these were carried over from last year. And some of them are new. But before we go into the draft recommendations, do folks have, comments or things they want to talk about regarding the budget, either my analysis or what we heard, or I know Jason, you wanted to talk about the planning positions.
Can I ask a question first?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Can you go back to the slide on the MARS, maximum allowable rent, and explain, is that calculated based on the AMI level and then 40% of that household size or income? Maybe I didn't get that in the
Isn't it like 85% of 40%? I thought.
Said it was.
So the maximum allowable rents are indexed to the 60% AMI rent levels. And so how we sort of compare that to housing grant participants is because the program is sort of set by per person, determines which bracket of MAR you fall in. Typically, we subscribe the 1 to 2 person households to the 1 bedroom rent level at 60% AMI, 2 or more, or 2 to 4 ends up being the 60% for 2 bedroom AMI, and then 5 or more household members have the price point of a 3 bedroom at 60% AMI.
Thank you. And Nicole, what was the 85% of the percent of AMI? I know I was reading that in the housing grant study, and I'm trying to.
So that's actually the income threshold. So in the code for housing grant, we are to serve residents that are at 85% of the 50% area median income level. And so that broken down by household size, you generate a maximum income threshold for participants. So instead of serving 50% at participants that make at 50% AMI or below, it's really 85% at that 50 number and below.
Okay.
So it's, yeah. Why it's complicated,
Yeah.
but somebody has to do that math every year. The AMI changes. So imagine how my staff do.
Other questions? Yeah.
I don't know if you have the answer to this, but on the eviction prevention, do you have any idea how many households we're serving or we're expected to serve in FY25 with this 2.3 million?
I don't have that on hand, but I know next week they will.
Okay. Thanks.
Other questions?
I just want to say thank you for putting this together.
Of course. I was actually looking forward to it. One of those weird nerdy things that like, oh, the manager's budget is out. And for anyone who's come through, it's interesting because it's a very political document versus just a financial document, right? Like it's every year different things are emphasized. Some things are dropped out of it depending on what the manager wants to, emphasize to the public or de-emphasize by not including that information. Yeah, oftentimes you have to comb through previous ones to figure out like how things have actually changed. I think that was especially true last year, where I think the proposed budget tried to appear very rosy with housing funding when it was actually cutting funding. It was like, oh, this is this percentage of county funds, but it was a smaller percentage than prior years, but it didn't say that in the document. Yeah, it's interesting to go through and see how the county's trying to portray what they're doing, and then marry that up to what they've done in the past and what the impacts might be. But again, very appreciative of staff for answering questions and helping to clarify. An area that I wasn't able to get more clarification was the Office of Human Rights and their budget. So I don't know how much of their proposed 968,000 is actually related to the fair housing enforcement that they do. I haven't heard back from them yet. And I know separately the document says that there's 46,000 for fair housing. And I think CPHC was able to track down that that's part of the Office of the Human Rights budget. I just have no idea what that money's for. And haven't been able to figure that out. It's similar to like about 50,000 is what they would allocate for fair housing testing in the past, but the county hasn't done that since 2019. And they had money in the budget last year that they called fair housing, but it looks like it wasn't spent and it was removed from the budget. It was like a cost saving or something this year. So yeah, it's just unclear what's happening there, and hoping to get some clarification. If we're actually going to do fair housing testing at some point in the future. I know it's a goal of the fair housing plan that the board approved last year, as well as expanding the fair housing testing, which is why it's one of the recommendations that I have. But it was not clear from the budget document what's actually happening or proposed to happen for this year. It was good to see that for CAP inspections. So for those who were following the Serrano situation, this is one of the things that came out of that, is having CPHD do inspections of, I think, is it at least like 10% of CAF units every year, and starting with like the oldest ones, I believe. So that happened 2 years in a row. And this year, it looks like that's been rolled into ongoing funding instead of just one-time funding. So hopefully that will continue, because that is one of the commitments that the county made to ensuring that their existing affordable housing stock meets I'm trying to think of the name of HUD's standards, housing
Quality standards.
There we go, housing quality standards. So that's great that that's been added as ongoing funding to continue, because that's, I think, super important to ensuring that our residents in subsidized units have quality housing. Then I think looking at AHIP, it is nice to see that there's an increase over last year. I think last year was a little bit confusing because AHIP was actually less than I thought it was. I thought it was 20 million or 20.5 million, but it turns out only 15.3 million was included ultimately in AHIP. The rest just came from the Columbia Pike TIF balance, which is a separate, pot of money. So this year, the fact that 20 million is being allocated up front by the manager, because if people remember last year, I think only like 9 million was proposed by the manager, and the board had to add additional funding. So it's great to see that HIT proposal is starting off at 20 million. As Alice said, I think it's still not nearly enough. And from talking to staff, it looks like all of that money is already spoken for with existing projects. So again, unless something changes, the notice of funding availability for FY 2025 is not going to happen again, just like it hasn't happened for the last 2 years, which means new projects aren't going to get AHIP funding. Which is unfortunate because that's, I think Alice had mentioned that a lot of the affordable housing developers are looking elsewhere to see where they can get that sort of last mile funding to help them move forward with affordable housing developments. And if Arlington's not able to offer that, it just means we're going to have less affordable housing that's constructed. I'm trying to think if there are other things that stood out to me. Obviously with housing grants, very happy to see that number's going up and that they're adding two additional FTEs to help with the housing grants program. It's different than the number of staff that the study said was needed, which I think was 3 or 4. But it's good to see that at least 2 are being proposed. And part of me wishes that the order of the agenda was reversed here, that the housing grant study came first so that we could look at all those recommendations and priorities listed in the document before we make a decision on the budget and what we think should happen, because there's, I think, a lot of other things in there that all have price tags associated with them that are not included in this budget. But for those who've had a chance to look at that document, we can still talk about and make recommendations. We just won't have the benefit of the presentation until after this. The thing that also kind of stood out for me was the homelessness services budget. I don't think was significantly, and Nicole, can you clarify, is this significantly more or about the same as last year? I don't actually have it listed what the previous fiscal year spending was for homelessness services.
I can just say without getting in trouble that it's just a marker of a slight increase. We will be going through a competitive RP process for shelter providers, so that's just a placeholder, but there's a larger number that's possibly will be expected in FY25.
Than what is advertised in the budget? Okay. I don't know what to do with that information, but thank you.
Wait until next week.
Yeah. A lot of my concern around the homelessness services budget is we've adopted a very ambitious plan to functionally end homelessness in 4 years, and I don't see that reflected in the funding amounts. And I think that if we're going to be successful in doing that, it's going to require more money. I doubt it's just that we were bad at it before and now we decided to be good at it and we don't need more money. But usually it's, you need more money to make things like that happen. And that's where in the 5th recommendation, and these don't have price tags associated with them, but including additional rental subsidies, bit more behavioral health resources, permanent disorder housing, all those things are things that will likely be needed in order to make that happen. Do we want to talk about the recommendations, or do people have more comments, questions related to the budgetary items?
Just another question.
Yeah.
For the housing choice vouchers, is that based on formula funds to Arlington, or how does that get? How do we know how much money we're getting from federal government to administer that?
So housing choice voucher, there's a sort of an algorithm based on initially an allocation that is set per jurisdiction. A budget renewal is looked at depending on the utilization of the allocation that any Public Housing Authority will have. So there's really not a growth outside of ensuring that the vouchers that you currently have leased, based on trends of increased rent, HUD will then give you sort of a budget authority of spending based on your utilization. So if we continue with a high lease up rate, I think we're allocated roughly around 1,800 vouchers. If we continue to lease up those 1,800 vouchers with our budget authority, then we'll continue to see that expense, the budget appropriation will go along each year as at an increase. But public housing authorities do run the risk if they don't keep pace and keep those vouchers utilized, then HUD could come in and take funding from any jurisdiction.
And Nicole, can you talk a little bit more about for housing grants? It's the projected number of households served. It says it will likely increase by 5%. Where does that number come from?
It looks at the month over month sort of growth and trends from year to year. Also the application intake. So we have a whole budget team that, you know, looks at all of these indicators every month. The expenses that either increase every month, and we're just projecting based on continual month over month, quarter over quarter growth, an estimate of what the next year would look like.
Okay. And do we have a sense of why the demand for housing grants has been increasing?
I think a number of things. I think a good call right now is the maximum allowable rents are keeping pace with the market. So we've got supply that, you know, our residents are able to find and secure housing at those rates. I do think there's a bit of more education and outreach about the program. So the more that, you know, we have our residential services groups within the community working with our most vulnerable and, you know, explaining the application process, I think it's become more attractive, and it's definitely been utilized as a tool within our shelter agencies for sure, as sort of the next bridge subsidy into housing that's ongoing and permanent for as long as they stay eligible.
Thank you. Anything else before we go into the recommendations?
Mr. Chair.
Oh, go ahead, Doris.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions about the budget report, which I really appreciated. But at the beginning, I want to say that I really appreciated the list that you provided of potential budget priorities coming from the Housing Commission, and I sincerely believe that the Disability Commission will be prepared. I'm going to share this information, but will be prepared to speak in support of those budget priorities that are coming from the Housing Commission, those or whatever you adopt tonight. But we really appreciated your list, especially the list regarding fair housing and monies for the Office on Human Rights, but also for testing and other enforcement, and then also the fair housing equity plan.
And Doris, sorry, you're very quiet. Is there any way that you're able to either move closer to a mic or be a little bit louder? I don't know that.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. It's my fault, I guess. Can you hear me better?
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, when I have the comment that I read the document on the budget and also your recommendations or staff or your recommendations on positions that the Housing Commission will take on the budget, and I believe I will share it with my commission that we would like to be supporting those those recommendations in our testimonies and our participation in next week's meeting. And then also, however, I have a couple of questions. One is with regard to housing choice vouchers. I'm curious whether that budget and that information reflects the amount of money that's necessary for the NED's mainstream vouchers that are now a recurring voucher program that we can go back to HUD and say we've used these vouchers for nursing home transition and or for people at risk of homelessness, and I'm wondering whether that's included in all the calculations with the housing choice voucher, or whether it's a separate, calculation that you all are doing, or whether there's no money necessary from the local level.
Nicole?
All our specialized vouchers are included in that 24.4 million.
They're what? I'm sorry.
So the mainstream vouchers are
Right.
included in the total presentation that I did today, as well as
including the NED's vouchers as well.
correct.
Yeah. Okay, and then so then the other thing that I didn't see, and it may be embedded, is with our advocacy, the Housing Commission, Disability Commission, and others, we were able to get, as I understand it, we'll be starting the statewide rental assistance program, the SHRAP, for people who have developmental and intellectual disabilities and are part of the Olmstead settlement agreement. And so I'm wondering if that is contained in supportive housing, or whether it should be appearing as a separate, or whether there's no local funding involved or whatever.
So the SRAP is a state funded voucher program, which is operated through the Housing Choice Voucher Program as well. Those vouchers and that allocation is also included.
No, they aren't. They're coming from the state. It's the state.
The state budget allocation for SRAP is being administered through our Housing Choice Voucher Program. So what I'm saying is those vouchers are included in the presentation that I did. So that budget is also reflected in the 24.4 million that we're anticipating to spend in FY25.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thanks.
No problem.
Okay. Well, thank you, Doris. Jason, did you want to talk about the planning positions?
Sure. So just talking about recommendations.
Yeah.
Okay.
A little context of like what's being proposed to be cut.
Yeah. So there is a proposal to cut 2 planning positions that have not yet been filled. One comprehensive planner and one current planner. So the total fiscal impact would be just a little over $267,000 per year to remove these positions. And I was just looking at the production of CAFs every year, and I think this year in the budget actually it wasn't as low as I thought it, but it's still only the FY 2025 total CAF production is 494, which is higher than FY 2024 estimate, which is 142, but lower than the previous couple of years. And I think this wouldn't have a direct impact hiring these planners to do some of the studies that are coming up, which the county has prioritized, like 4.1 administration regulation update, special GLEP study refinements, and landscape standards update, and a variety of other priorities. But in terms of CAFs, like in hearing the percentage of people in um, with housing grants and housing choice vouchers, it's in that almost 100%, like 97% of people with housing grants are in CAFs, and then I think it's like 98, 99 with housing choice vouchers. So it's pretty much everyone with a grant or a voucher is in a CAF, and then if CAF production could be perhaps leveling off, then these planners can help do plans, area plans, or other different produce tools that can help get more CAFs, which may not reveal itself in necessarily this year or next year, but in the years down the line. So one of my proposals is adding a line item to suggest retaining these two planners at about $267,000, which those if people are working on those CAFs, they could produce whatever 5-10x of that amount of value in terms of CAF production to either pull in investment from outside sources or other various ways, so that there's the CAF. So that's like kind of roundabout, but that's just kind of some of the numbers.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, I do find that concerning too, because I know planning staff at the LRPC meeting last week or earlier this week, they talked about their work plan. It didn't include the East Falls Church, which we had recommended in our Plant Medicine Boulevard feedback and recommendations that they prioritize looking at East Falls Church, because we're never going to get to the affordable housing that we want to see along Lakes Boulevard without redoing that that plan. And the other piece that we talked about at the last meeting was looking at the affordable housing ordinance and the enabling legislation, and having staff provide some assistance with developing a recommendation for the board to take to the General Assembly. That's something that would likely happen in FY25. And if they're cutting planning staff, and planning staff currently don't have that as part of their work plan, it means it's probably not going to happen. And then we could end up going even more legislative assembly sessions without any proposals to get a better deal for Arlington residents when it comes to on-site caps and more money for AHIP through contributions from developers. So that's definitely a priority for me. And I think looking at them cutting, I think they cut a position last year as well from planning staff. So this would be the third in 2 years. It's just going to decrease their capacity to do the things that we've already recommended that they engage on. So yeah, I definitely find that concerning, and would like to include that as a recommendation, that they have enough planning staff, either not to cut them, or they have enough planning staff to be able to do things like East Falls Church and look at the affordable housing ordinance. Thoughts?
I don't know what the county thinks about it. We understand that there's two positions, but not that it's not needed, but what is the response, I guess?
Is it why they're cutting?
No,
or?
Is cutting a good idea? Is it bad? I mean, are we making recommendations that are fruitful, or are we just spinning our wheels? I don't know.
I mean, they're going to listen to some of what we say, maybe, and not listen to a lot of what we say. I mean, we've been asking for some of these things, like a deputy director position for the housing division at CPHC for several years. And every year when I talk to the county board about it, it's, not this year, but next year. Next year, I think we can do it. And then next year, there's always a good reason that they have for why we can't do it this year. And next year is going to be the year. But what I've seen is that a lot of these things, that eventually one of the years they actually do things like that.
If we put it in there, it might eventually
happen.
5 years down.
Yeah.
It might actually happen.
I feel like it becomes part of the just
Conversation.
yes around like, oh, what are housing needs? Well, they keep asking for that position, so that's something we should think about. And then someday someone will be like, let's do it. I also feel like cutting these positions, it's what, 260K you said, which is not a lot of money. and it does have a significant impact on the capacity of staff, because one of the things that we consistently hear in these meetings, and I think in planning meetings as well, is staff saying we don't have the capacity to do that. We don't. It's not in the work plan because we don't have enough resources to do this. And so I do think it is important for us to keep reminding the county board that staff is important to have, because we can't do the things that we want. And one of the things that I see too is we have made a lot of progress working with staff to come up with these great strategies and plans. And then on the implementation side, it's a struggle to actually be able to implement them because they don't have the resources to do it. And I think staff really wants to be able to do as much as they can, and they want to put it in the plan because they agree this is a good idea. But then at the end of the day, they have to sort of ration the resources. And so I think when it comes to both planning and housing division, we need more staff. Like, we just don't have the capacity. And as much as the county board has told me they don't want to hear us specifically ask for more staffing, because that's the county manager's job to tell them how much staffing is needed. They tell the county manager what needs to get done, and he tells them whether he has enough staff to do it. But clearly that process is somewhat broken because they'll approve the plans and the manager says, yes, we have enough staff to execute the plan. And then we talk to staff and they say, we don't have the resources to do that. So there's a disconnect. And part of that is politics. But I think it's important for us to continue pushing for, these are the staff that we think need to be in the county in order to move forward with these plans and strategies that are a good idea and are going to help people. With these planning staff, like too, with them being vacant, my understanding is generally they're vacant for a reason. So when people leave, the manager's office will kind of say, like, why don't you not fill that position? Because we may want to chop that in the budget for next year if it's looking tight. So it's not like they're not needed. It's more so someone left and they're unable to fill them currently because it's already been pre-identified as a position to be cut. So
that's why it's job announcement and for the same position over and over. It expired, we go back on there, and it's back there again.
That I don't know.
Okay. Because I'm like, I've known several people who applied for Arlington jobs, never got a call back, never heard anything, and then go back there like a month later, and the job is like reposted, and it's like, what is this cat and mouse game that you're playing? Either you need it or you don't. So that's probably a problem.
Yeah, that's probably a good question for whoever does HR for the county.
Yeah.
Who that is, and I've never talked to that person, but or people. But yeah, and I can't say whether that's tied specifically to an instance like this, but that is just my understanding. I can't speak for the manager and exactly how those decisions are made, but that is just my understanding of, like, the manager's office is always thinking about the next budget cycle and kind of like, based on revenue projections, do we think we might have to cut? Okay, position just became vacant. Why don't we freeze that position so that we can hold it? Because they don't want to lay people off. So it's much easier to just keep something vacant if someone is left.
Go for it, I guess.
So I guess just looking at the recommendations then, the first one around AHIP. So I know this is like a historic amount, 20.5 million that they're proposing. And we heard from Alice from Alliance for Housing Solutions, and this number has been around for years, that about 50 million is what they would need to do to actually meet our affordable housing master plan goals. I think asking for 30 million, yes. Then 50 million, I don't necessarily think that they're going to turn around and give us 30 million, but I think we should continue to remind them that this is still not enough. It's great that we're at 20.5 million. That's really important, but it's still a fraction of what we need if we're going to meet the goals that we've already agreed to, which is another example of county sets these very ambitious goals, but doesn't back it up with the resources to actually follow through with them, which is not unique. And then the next one, provide adequate funding for the implementation of the CAP strategies document and our report. So here, again, we've been asking for a deputy director position to support Ann Venetia for several years as someone who can sort of ease the burden on housing division staff, especially when there's a lot of the things that we've been working on, like the Fair Housing Plan and the CAP strategies document. Like there's a lot of research and efforts that have to go into just managing these new initiatives that we've been able to work with staff to identify as needs and priorities. But the housing division staff already have full-time jobs doing other things, so it's difficult for them to add more things on their plate. So having another position and someone who can help do some of that work, I continue to think is very important. And then, as we heard at the last meeting, that staff doesn't have the capacity to really support the formation and maintenance of resident councils at all the CAP properties. So that was one of the recommendations from our Serrano report, was that the county come up with a way to encourage and support the formation of these resident councils. I don't think in this case it needs to be like staff positions. I think giving more money to Bugada as part of their contract, or to other nonprofits who can work directly with residents at these properties and help organize them into resident councils, do leadership training, like all those things. And honestly, I don't think it would be that much money to just, say add 50,000 and now we have 2 resident councils, one at Barcroft and one at another property. But I continue to think that that's something that we should be pushing for because, staff doesn't have the capacity to do that. So I think we need to ask the board to increase the county's capacity. It doesn't necessarily, like I said, have to be staff members, but it could be, contractors or other resources that are brought to bear on that. With the adequate funding for the implementation of the Regional Fair Housing Plan that the board approved last year, I already talked about the testing. We haven't done fair housing testing since 2019. That's bad. We know that there's plenty of housing discrimination. It's all across the country, and we know it's terribly underreported. People don't know their rights, and one of the key ways to address that is through testing. And one of the things that I've recently heard from the continuum of care stakeholder community is that our housing choice voucher recipients are getting rejected at much higher rates than they previously were. And they're losing the vouchers because they can't lease up in time because they have, Nicole, how much time do they have to lease? Is Nicole still on? We lost Nicole.
I'm here.
Oh,
I'm here.
she's still there.
120 days.
Okay.
We usually issue the voucher, it's 30-day increments.
Okay. So within that 120 days, they're not able to find a landlord or property who's willing to rent to them. And so it's really important that the county, like Office of Human Rights, is able to enforce source of funds, which is not technically legal yet in the county. It is in the state, but that's also something very exciting. It's on the board agenda for the March meeting. So I'm super excited that they should be amending the human rights ordinance to include source of funds protection. But one of the key ways to enforce that is through this testing and identifying landlords who are not following the law. And then, yep, that was kind of the next one, specifically focused on the source of funds, because like that one is just it's a challenge, and we see that all over Virginia and in DC, that landlords for a very long time have been used to being able to just say, oh, you have a voucher? No, I don't rent to people with vouchers. And it's a significant shift for them to learn the new law, that they can't do that, and also comply with it. And the best way to ensure compliance is enforcement and having penalties for not complying. So I think that's really important.
Yep. So if they know that we don't have money to test, there's not going to be no tests, right? So they
You can still file a fair housing complaint from the state and also to the federal government.
Well, not for source of funds, but you could through the state, yeah. Or you could do, I think, a private action because fair housing law is unique in that you can just sue on your own without having to go through an administrative process. But a lot of people don't know that it's illegal, and a lot of voucher holders they're used to being denied housing, so they're just like, oh, that landlord won't rent to people like me. I'm going to go someplace else or try to find someone who will. And it's only been illegal in Virginia since I think 2020 is when that took effect. So it's a shift, and it's a shift on education for voucher holders and also housing grant recipients and people who receive veterans like housing benefits. All of those are protected under source of funds. So it's exciting to see that the county is going to amend the human rights ordinance to add that as a protected class so the county staff can start enforcing that. But then we need to step up enforcement because it's a problem. And then the next one, providing funding to modernize the housing grants IT system. Nicole, is that what Yardi is? Is that the name of the system?
Yes, it's our
Okay.
client management system.
Nicole, how old is that system, would you say?
Well, it's fairly new for us. I think we onboarded during the pandemic, I want to say 2021, 2022. So it's a fairly new system.
Okay. Are you able to talk about any of the challenges with the system?
I mean, I think, like as part of the study that's on the agenda as well, I think that will end up kind of closing the loop on where the additional staffing is missed, because there are some components of that client management system that we have access to turn on. It's just the manpower behind, pushing those portals out to the community. Also structuring things like the housing grant application. We're still paper form. This could be, there's an opportunity to embed that in the client management system, but you need development time, you need development hands to build that. And then you also need to educate and outreach so people know how to use the system. But that's with all of our rental assistance programs and other programs at DHS as well.
So would it be better to characterize this rather than funding to modernize the system, like just funding to enhance or improve? Based on, yeah, I think, yes, I think we should make that change so that it's enhance the system. It's recognizing the challenges that were brought up in the housing grant study. That is what I want to say here. And again, we're not necessarily, like, I'm going through my recommendations here. We still are going to have discussion and vote on whether or not you think that, any of these should move forward or if they all should or just a portion. So I just wanted to get clarification on some of these and have discussion. And then 5, we kind of already talked about, but provide adequate funding for the implementation of the county's strategic plan to functionally end homelessness in the next 4 years. Anyone have any questions about these items?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Doris.
Okay. Does Arlington participate in the
Can you speak up a little bit, Doris?
I'm sorry. Does Arlington participate in the ADU program that's authorized statewide, or which during new construction designates designates affordable dwelling units that bring down the rent to maybe 40% or 50% of what it would be, and then use rental subsidies, like a housing choice voucher to further buy down the rent, or because we have the AHIF or some other program, are we not doing that? I was just curious.
Anne, are you able to answer that?
Yeah, but she might accept.
I think, Doris, we'll need to get back to you on that. The way that the county government is set up, I believe that we are not participating in that program because of our county manager form of government. This is a very technical legal issue, so I'd like to lean on our attorneys to help answer this. So if it's okay, I think we'll need to get back to you on that question.
Yeah, I am just in the last couple of years learning more about that program. I do know that Fairfax County participates. I just wasn't sure. I mean, Arlington is doing a good job. I'm just curious. I thought that Arlington wasn't participating. I just wanted to ask the question.
Yeah, it's yes, and so if we could get back to you with more of the information, the technical reasons of why we're not, and I believe it is because of the form of government that we have in Arlington, but I want to confirm that with our attorneys. I don't want to misspeak and give incorrect information.
Sure. I was just thinking budget-wise.
Thanks, Doris. Yeah, I do hear other localities refer to, like, they don't use the term cap. Like, I think that's just an Arlington specific term. They use like ADUs and even like market rate affordable. I don't hear outside Arlington. I hear like naturally occurring. One of the weird things about Virginia is, like, despite being like a very strong Dillon rule state, which in theory is supposed to mean that we have uniformity across the state, everything is different. It's just the state legislature decides what each locality gets to do as opposed to the localities themselves, which I think defeats the purpose of having a system like that, but whatever. It's beyond the scope of this commission. The next item was provide adequate funding for regular equity analysis for all housing and planning projects. So this is an area where I think the county's been making progress in looking at marginalized populations and how that relates to housing programs and policy making decisions, as well as projects that come before like planning staff. But again, there's a resource issue when it comes to, like, you saw, I think pretty extensive equity analysis when it came to missing middle, but you don't see that level of analysis for most things that come before us because it takes a lot of time and resources to put that together. So I think that should continue to be a priority, is having the county invest in looking at who's benefiting, who's being left out of benefiting from the programs and services.
The last presentations we've gotten, they've always addressed
They
the site plans.
They do like demographic information, which is helpful, and I think that's a step in the right direction. It's different than like impact analysis. So there's always more that there's farther that we could go, but I think staff has made a lot of strides to include more equity information analysis. But sorry, you were gonna say, Alex?
Yeah, no, it's just for the site plans, we've been including the racial and ethnicity dashboard information by census tract. So that's the step that we've been adding in, but yeah, obviously there's a lot more information out there. So not sure how much we can collect, but what we can collect, we'll
And then the last one that I added was the planner positions, and then specifically calling out the East Falls Church, like revisiting that plan as well as the affordable housing ordinance and recommendations. Thoughts from commissioners on, is anything missing? Do people feel like we shouldn't include some of these?
Are we able to make a stance on the tax rate and raising, as Alice mentioned, we're not allowed to?
We can. I don't want to.
Okay.
Generally, because I feel that we tell the county board what we think they should do.
Yeah.
It's up to them to figure out how to fund it, as opposed to us saying, you know, you should raise taxes by this amount in order to, like, the Fiscal Affairs Advisory Committee, like, I feel like that's more in their lane. I just feel like that's a little bit, it's not out of scope, like, we can do that. I just don't feel comfortable with that. I don't think it's necessary on our part, but if you want to discuss it, you know, and see if other commissioners agree, happy to entertain that.
I'm fine with that. Otherwise, I think these are all great recommendations.
I have a comment and two quick questions.
Mhm.
First comment, I fully endorse, just for the record, the AHIF increase being number one, and that it being $30 million. I'm really supportive of that. And two, first question is, and this is a sincere question, not a rhetorical one, do these adequate funding, the phrase adequate funding, is that a useful thing? I mean, I understand, I guess that expresses a priority, but is that something we want to put a number to, or maybe not? Maybe we want to leave some flexibility or ambiguity. And then my second question, is it useful to have 7 recommendations? Is it better to pare it back to a couple that we really want to focus on? And those are questions for people who have been here longer than I, because I don't know the dynamic between us and the board that much.
Yeah, I mean, I will say the more recommendations, the harder it is for the board to, like, pay attention to all of them, because, you know, the more things you're asking for, like, if you come and you say, we just want AF to be higher, then like, Housing Commission wants this one thing, like, let's see if we can, you know, try and do that. But if you take things out, you're basically saying this is not a priority for the Housing Commission. It's not something we want you to think about or worry about. So yes, I would say generally, the more things that we add, the less likelihood there is that any one of them will, you know, move forward, because there's more that we're asking for, and they all have a cost associated with them. And if the commission would like to drop some off or pare back, you know, happy to have that discussion. And we did that this year or last year with our legislative priorities, where I think we had a list of 7 probably to start, and I think we narrowed it down to 3 or 4 maybe. Again, for similar reasons, that like the county, there's no way that we're gonna pay attention to 7, you know, legislative priorities from us, but maybe, you know, 3 had a better shot. I think it'd be hard for me to like give up on any, because I feel like a lot of these were sort of like years of conversations of like, hey, this is important and this is important and this is important. But if people feel like some of them are more at the bottom and can come off the list, then we should definitely have that discussion. And certainly this ranking is not necessarily intentional on my part. It tends to just be like, oh, I just thought of that one. Let me put this down as the next item. So if people think that the order of these should change as well. I know you said, you know, AHIP funding should be number 1, and I think I agree with that. But if people want to reorder any of the others, and then maybe entertain the discussion of should the lowest priority ones drop off at that point, we can certainly do that. Do people want to take time to order? And I know your other question about the term adequate funding, we can use a different term. That's one that I've been using in budget letters to the county. I don't know if that's the best term. We can just say,
rather than specifying a specific amount. Not that the term adequate is.
Yeah, it's tough because I feel like I don't know the specific amounts, like to say for the CPHD deputy director for the housing division, I don't know how much that costs. I could throw out 300K. I don't know if that's super high, if that's low. I don't know what that pays, what the benefits package is like. So that's, and I feel like being able to go to the board and say, hey, we want this position, and like it's on them to work with the manager to figure out how much that costs and if they can work it into the budget. But if you guys do feel that it's important, like with AHIP, to give a specific amount, we can do that as well.
Only reason I ask is because, you know, like, we do federal budgeting, and at the federal level, if you say that, that means you don't want it. I'm not saying that, so I'm just wondering if that signals something that we don't want, it signals to the board, you know more about this than I do. So if we sincerely do not know how much it costs, I know we're past time here, way past time. So I don't want to prolong this conversation unnecessarily, but I just wanted to raise that as something for consideration.
It's fair. I think it's just the amount of work that would go into figuring out like estimates for each of these. I've never felt like was worth that effort. And also it's something like staff can't really tell us that. Like if I go to Anna and I say, Ann, can you tell me how much a deputy director would cost for you? Ann's gonna be like, I can't do that. Not to speak for you, Ann, but pretty sure that's what the response is gonna be, because in a sense, she's feeding us information to go to the board and make an end run around like her boss, like the manager, right? So like, unless we did our own independent analysis of what we think these should cost, which is gonna be very time consuming, we're not gonna get that information generally from staff, unless it's the housing grant study, which very helpfully did provide estimates for this is how much it would cost. But like, if you look at like the CAF strategies document, like typically would say this will cost money, but it wouldn't specify how much money these things would cost. And I think for a lot of plans, like the Fair Housing Plan, there's no dollar figures attached to anything. It's just like, we adopt this goal, but that document does not specify like it'll cost us $5 million over the next 3 years to actually implement this.
I make a motion that we approve this plus number 7.
Second.
Okay, any more discussion? Let's do a roll call vote. Okay, Commissioner Montgomery.
Yes.
Commissioner Surface.
Yes.
Commissioner Weiner.
Yes.
Commissioner Heminger.
Yes.
And I vote yes. Commissioner Escobar is not present, I think. Commissioner Rubalcaba.
Yes.
Commissioner Linick.
Yes.
And Commissioner, I'm forgetting, Jason, your last name? Schwartz?
Oh, sorry, it's only on one side.
Yeah, Schwartz.
Oh, yes.
Commissioner Ross?
Yes.
Okay, I don't think I left anyone out, right? Okay,
No.
and that passes unanimously. Great, thank you all for that. I will prepare the letter and send it out to you all for edits. And just a reminder, so I will be representing the commission on next Thursday at the budget hearing. And I'll basically be presenting the letter. Okay, next item, we've already talked a lot about this housing grant study.
So with us for the housing grant study, we have from DHS.
Good afternoon. I know you all know Nicole. I just wanted to briefly introduce myself. I'm Caitlin Hutchison. I am Assistant Director for the Department of Human Services, and I work closely with our Housing Assistance Bureau and supported their staff in the housing grant study. So I'll share the presentation, and Nicole will kick us off. Let me just get that up for you, Nicole.
Caitlin? It's me again. Good evening. It's Nicole Dula, Housing Assistance Bureau Director. All right, so I told you, I promised more housing grants discussion. So at the direction of the county board, the Department of Human Services conducted a holistic housing grant study to analyze the current program, its legislative origins, and to identify potential gaps in affordable housing needs. This program, since its inception, had never been studied. So these efforts in our review of the program will help determine what action the housing grant program can take moving forward and how the changes to the program might inform the county's current and future budget cycles. So I'm going to start by taking you through a very short tour of the housing grant program history and our trends, and then I'm going to tee it up for the second half of the presentation, which Caitlin will take over and get to the meat of the recommendations. The housing grant program was designed to serve as a critical resource in addressing housing affordability challenges and supporting low-income individuals and family renters with access to affordable housing options that would otherwise be unattainable. The housing grant program is specifically designed to aid targeted groups of low-income households. So that would include seniors that are 65 and older, totally and permanently disabled residents, or individuals that are actively engaged in Arlington County's behavioral health program, and working families with minor children that meet a minimum work hour requirement. DHS has been the administrator of the housing grant program since July of 1991. Originally, the housing grant program sat with the Commissioner of Revenue's office. This program is 100% locally funded, and all of the participating households must have some form of income. Next slide. Okay, so this is a snapshot of our last 5-year budget picture. Ongoing funding is in blue, the one-time funding requests are in orange, and the top gray lines depicts our actual expenditures across this 5-year period. You can see from FY19 to from year end FY19, we began at 8.7 million, and then we ended in FY23 with $12.6 million expenditure. So this is a 44% expenditure growth between those time periods. The trends here really illustrate that the base budget that has been allocated to the housing grant program has not really kept pace with the community needs. And so as I presented earlier, the FY25 county manager's proposed budget now has allocated 15 million in ongoing funds. So our base has been and is proposed for an increase. Also on this chart, there's the COVID effect. So COVID affected the program between FY20 through FY2022. And this is where we did experience, exponential growth. During this time period, we did have to temporarily modify our program requirements to keep pace, to keep households stabilized during the public emergency of the pandemic. For households that either lost their income during this time and or could otherwise prove that their income eligibility status prior to the COVID onset would have qualified for the program, we onboarded and kept grants sustained throughout the pandemic. When we began to rebound, we then reinstated all of the original program requirements, such as the work hour requirements. And so that's where you see just a slight dip in FY 2023 from our actual expenditures for households that no longer qualify. And the yellow line of this graph represents our staffing dedicated to the program, starting at 5.9 FTEs in FY19, and where we are now at 7.5. Due to growth in the case volume, as I previously presented, we have onboarded some overstrength positions through the pandemic, but as you can see, our case volumes, and you'll see in the next slide, continue to rise because of the increase of participants in the program continues to grow. Next slide. So this gives you a better a glimpse of that, another glimpse of the 5-year distribution of who we serve. I mentioned we have seniors 65 and older. On average, they represent 31% of our participants. In the orange, residents with disabilities or connected to behavioral health on average represent 42% of our participants. And then working families with minor children on average represent 26% of our participants. And they're in that sort of the gray stack bar. I've already mentioned our maximum allowable rents and how our index continues to grow. But one thing to note of, again, with the increase in the applications, the increase of participants, where this program does differ from Housing Choice Voucher is this is an open program where Housing Choice Voucher, the federal program, can open and close their wait lists and they work off of a stagnant list. My staff are able to take in applications every day, anywhere from 100 to 150 applications that come in monthly and have to be processed within 60 days. So it's a continually growing program. Sorry, next slide. Okay. So as part of the study, we wanted to scourge the earth to see, you know, what other programs like Housing Grant might be out there. And we found out we are indeed pretty unique and one of a kind. Most comparable program we found, it was in Portland, Oregon. I would say anything, if you want to read up more on these other programs that, you know, were discovered nationally, those are also contained in this study. For the most part, many are short-term subsidy programs, and Arlington's locally funded housing grant program is fairly unique. Okay, next slide. Here, this slide just highlights other rental assistance programs that are managed and also available in the county, as well as the total funding by source. So I just take you through the highlights of, you know, in addition to housing grants, in addition to permanent supportive housing, and the HCV program, we have our continuum of care providers, and DHS serves as sort of the lead agency that applies for a variety of grants on our continuum of care partners' behalf. So who makes up our continuum of care? Our nonprofit providers such as Path Forward, Doorways, Bridges to Independence, and New Hope Housing, as well as other community stakeholders and safety net providers that sit around the table of our executive committee for the continuum of care. So through our shelter providers, they have access to rental rapid rehousing funding. And so across local, state, federal, essentially rapid rehousing is temporary assistance that will help bridge to permanent housing. So it's a short-term bridge while applying for other potential longer-term resources, such as the housing grant that could pick up the subsidy where rapid rehousing ends. The continuum of care also operates their own permanent supportive housing rental assistance subsidies. Okay, yeah. So this is an ongoing rental assistance, and it's primarily to support households with disabilities and those that are chronically homeless. I've already covered DHS's permanent supportive housing program for those that are disabled, either seriously mentally ill, have substance disorders, and Housing Choice Voucher we also previously covered. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. All right. So as I mentioned, the study was birthed under the county manager's recommendation to study the housing grant's purpose, the configuration, and to provide recommendations to the county board. These directives were also codified in the Affordable Housing Master Plan implementation framework. And so developing a proposal on which eligibility should be expanded, and also taking a look at the market rents was called out, as well as identifying the program's effectiveness in meeting the housing needs of our extremely low income households. And I will pass it to Caitlin for the meat of the recommendations in the study.
Thanks, Nicole. Sorry for the jumping around. I'm also having mouse issues over here. But just to provide a brief overview of the engagement that was conducted over the life of the Housing Grant Study. In the middle of 2022, the county engaged with a contractor, a consultant, to help conduct focus groups. And between June and August of 2022, there were 9 focus groups conducted that included 46 total participants. And those participants covered current and past participants in the Housing Grants Program, past applicants from the Housing Grants Program as well, and then various stakeholders, including commission representatives and nonprofit partners and advocates in the community as well. Later in 2022, after the focus groups were completed, the contractor also assisted with the completion of a telephone survey, and there were 108 telephone surveys completed amongst current and past participants from the Housing Grants Program, as well as past applicants. And those telephone surveys helped sort of further dive into issues that came up in the focus groups earlier that summer. Following the telephone survey, we had staff conduct internal informational interviews with staff both within DHS and within CPHD. So these were staff that work frequently in some way, shape, or form with the Housing Grants Program. And we had 52 staff from CPHD, and then our Aging and Disability Services Division, Child and Family Services Division, Public Health, Economic Independence, Finance and Information Systems, and Behavioral Health Care. Now we're kind of in the recommendation review phase. We have conducted county board and county manager briefings. We're going to various commissions, starting with the Housing Commission tonight, and we're also gathering some additional community input. And then from there, we will have the final report. So just to provide an overview of the recommendations that were included in the Housing Grants Study, there are 17 total recommendations, and they cover 4 categories: eligibility criteria, staffing, program requirements, and program operations. And as I think was mentioned earlier, the FY 2025 proposed budget does include funding for a couple of these recommendations, including funding 12 transition-aged youth and youth aging out of foster care for up to 36 months in a special pilot category, and then 2 additional housing specialist FTEs. So an overview of the 17 recommendations, I'll provide that quickly. In the eligibility criteria category, as I mentioned, there's the transition-aged youth and youth aging out of foster care category, and that would allow for youth who are 21 to 24 to receive up to 36 months of a housing grant as they sort of transition out of that 21 to 24 age. And then there are 2 recommendations related to households with undocumented individuals. And it's sort of broken into 2 because there are existing households that do have mixed status residents. And so the first of those recommendations recommends sort of making those households whole. At the moment, they receive a prorated housing grants benefit. And then there's a second recommendation related to undocumented households, allowing for up to 50 households to receive a housing grant that are not already receiving it, but do have undocumented residents in the household. And then the 4th recommendation under the eligibility criteria category is to expand housing grants eligibility criteria to provide rental assistance to individuals who are under the age of 65 and have a serious mental illness or a chronic substance use disorder diagnosis, even if they're not currently receiving services from the Arlington County Community Services Board. Because as Nicole mentioned earlier, in order to receive a housing grant under this category, currently households do have to be receiving services either through the Arlington County CSB or through one of our partner agencies. In terms of staffing recommendations, there were several, the first being to reclassify existing positions to better align the classification of the position with the job duties. The second is to create a new senior level position, which would carry a small caseload, but also could potentially provide a lot of other services such as training to, housing grant staff and other staff in the county, nonprofit partners. They could also provide quality assurance and help implement a number of the different recommendations from this study. The third, staffing recommendation is related to creating a new position, which we call the Housing Grants Navigator, and that position would really serve as a liaison across the county and with our nonprofit partners as well, helping clients who are either applying for the first time to the Housing Grants Program, or perhaps, they are receiving a Housing Grants benefit and need assistance, talking with their landlord or something like that, or perhaps they need assistance with, submitting like their renewal documentation and things like that. And so this would be to help a number of housing grants clients who are not perhaps connected to a case manager of some sort through another program. And then in the program requirements section, there's a number of recommendations. The first being to replace the work hour requirement for working families with a minimum earned income, and that would be tied to minimum wage. And it would also be tied to the total number of working parents or guardians in the household. And so currently, the number of hours that a household needs to work is tied to the age of children and the number of parents or guardians, and it can get really confusing for households. And that's something that we heard quite a bit in the survey and the focus groups. The second proposed recommendation in program requirements is to align the MAR with 60% AMI in real time. Currently, it's lagging a little bit behind when the 60% AMI gets updated each year, and so that creates a period of time where the MARs are really not keeping pace, and so they end up being about a year behind the AMIs in Arlington. The third recommendation is inspections for non-CAF units as needed. Currently, we don't provide any inspections, and we did hear from folks in the focus groups and the telephone surveys that those would be helpful. And some of the individuals who do receive housing grants do receive inspections through CPHD, but not all. The fourth recommendation under program requirements is to decrease the client rent responsibility from 40% to 35%. And the fifth is to increase flexibility for working adults with disabled dependents so that they have more time to care for their dependents as needed. The sixth would be to align income limits to 50% AMI, as was mentioned earlier. It's currently 85% of 50% AMI, and so this would just make it a little bit cleaner and easier for people to understand what the income limits are for the program. The next is to exclude up to $20,000 of income for children who are residing in the home between the ages of 18 and 26 if they're full-time students. Currently, that income is all counted towards the household income, but we did hear in the focus groups and the surveys that some children who are living at home while students are not able to, help pay for household expenses because they're paying for school. And then the last recommendation in the program requirements section is to have a utility deduction of $100 per household per month. Currently, there's not a utility deduction for housing grants households. That is something that is provided to housing choice voucher households. And so this would sort of help bring the housing grants program up to be a little more on par with the housing choice voucher program. And then lastly, the program operations category, there were two recommendations. The first is to perform electronic record enhancements to allow for things like web-based applications and recertifications for the housing grants program. Nicole alluded to this a little bit earlier, but the program does have the capability to do this. The electronic program does have the capability to do this, but it's not currently turned on or configured. And so this would be something that would require some time from staff and some time from the program staff as well. And then increasing staff opportunities for training and community outreach, just so that we can continue to ensure that our staff are adequately trained to work with diverse populations, and also have the ability to continue to conduct community outreach. As much as we think people know about the housing grants program, there's always populations in Arlington who let us know that they had never heard about it before. So I think there's always room for continued penetration in the community. So those are the recommendations. We are asking if anybody has feedback to either join us in one of the community information sessions that we'll be holding in early April. There is information on this web page that is linked here. April 3rd will be a Spanish information session, virtual. April 4th will be an English information session. And then if people are not able to join us for one of those sessions, they can send us feedback via email, and they can tell us what they think about the housing grant study through that avenue as well. Any questions?
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you for all the work that went into the study. It was super interesting to see. I did have a question because the report didn't specify. Oh, there's public comment on this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Alice.
Go ahead, Alice.
Sorry, I don't have any for this item. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So when did the housing grant program actually start? So I know the report says it transferred over to DHS in 1991, but when did the program first form?
I'm not sure of the answer. I don't know if Nicole is either.
Is that would be, considering how unique the program is, I get questions actually quite often from other jurisdictions asking about Arlington's housing grant program and how it works and the authority and how long it's been operating. And this report, like the week or so I've had it, I've been able to forward and say, here's a lot of answers to the questions that you have. But if you guys are able to include a little bit more about that initial history, I think that could be also helpful for people who are interested in kind of how such a unique program first came about and when that happened, and how it ended up under the Commissioner of Revenue, which also seems like that it's a super interesting discussion. Is the authority for this program, does this come from the Community Services Board, or like where is the authority derived from for the county to operate housing grants?
So I believe it's chapter 44 of the Arlington County Code.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it looks like it's 63.2-314 of the Code of Virginia is where the local code refers.
That was 62 what?
63.2-314. And it looks like the earliest date mentioned in the local code is in 1974.
Wow.
Which was well before it resided in DHS.
Interesting.
That's not to say that that's when it started. I'm just looking to see like when there were revisions made to the local code.
Because part of that for me goes into the question around the undocumented folks, And that, because that has been something I think the Housing Commission has been talking about for many years now of like, why can't we serve undocumented populations more fully with this program if it's all county money and not state money? It was great to see that LAGC had, made their legal brief and that the county attorney agreed with it. That's not something I typically see. So that was exciting. So the decision to potentially include existing families or households that have undocumented members. So I know it's like kind of prorated currently, like just the members of the household who are documented get funds, and you subtract the amount for the folks who are not. Is that pending a board decision then about how to move forward at this point?
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay, so it's in the hands of the board to decide how they want, because it looked like, and I don't have the exact number, but the fiscal impact of making that change was not significant.
In the report, it highlighted if we were to undo the prorate for existing households, there was, I think it was less than $200,000, right, annually added to the program. But then if you open up that eligibility criteria a little larger, I think we were proposing a recommendation of a pilot of 50 so households that would be undocumented, and that is a little over roughly $500,000. But obviously, if larger than 50 households, that's a different number.
Yeah. Well, I just know, we talk as a community that's undocumented low-income population in Arlington is kind of when you look at marginalized and just the most in need population, like that's kind of it. So I think the fact that we now at least think we have the legal authority to move forward with that option is fantastic. I think it's great for the Housing Commission to talk to the board to see what their timeline is for making a decision about that and how we can help influence that. Do you have a sense of why the phone recipients weren't very in favor of expanding the program's eligibility to undocumented residents? I was kind of surprised at how low, I think it was 40% said they would favor that. And that's existing housing grant members, those who have applied, and I can't remember what the other criteria was.
It was current and past recipients or participants, and then past applicants.
And there's no additional insight as to why that was one of the least favored expansions that was discussed during the phone survey?
No, I think that the subject came up in the focus groups, and so it was specifically asked about in the phone survey, but the phone survey was pretty scripted. It was not as open-ended, so we didn't necessarily get a sense of why folks felt that way.
Okay. Because I know being part of one of the focus groups, like that was one of the things that we talked about was, hey, the county really needs to expand this to include undocumented folks. Also, can you provide clarification on the optional inspections by request and what that would actually mean? Like what if the unit fails inspection, what would happen in that scenario?
I'll take this one.
Sure,
I mean,
sounds good.
as it currently exists right now, there's no inspection component lumped or linked to housing grant participation. I said 97% of our participants do reside in CAFs. And so where the inspection would touch a housing grant participant would be through our partners at the housing division, right? If they would come up in their compliance testing of their 20% portfolio. But outside of CAFs, I mean, anyone can take a housing grant and lease up wherever. So it could be a private residence. So in those instances, you know, if a participant did want an inspection, where would they go to? You know, who could they lean on? And so I think that's where this recommendation came in for those that might be in Marks or in other residents that are sort of outside the purview of a regular inspection. Could have a resource to go to.
So is the thinking then that if they requested an inspection, counties did the inspection, found deficiencies, the county wouldn't have any legal way to require that the property owner fix those issues, but they could at least, my assumption is to go for like, well, those are, I mean, it's smoke alarms and is the building gonna collapse? Like, I feel like is the, well, for code, the health is, I don't even know, does health apply for housing?
I mean, so under HQS, housing quality standards, it is general testing of health and safety. So, you know, you are looking for peeling paint, right? You're looking for conditions of floors. You're looking for, you know, penetrated walls. I think Marie is off. But, you know, there are health related conditions that are part of those indicators that one could cite as a deficiency, not just, you know, beyond just your battery needs your smoke detector needs a battery, but there are other conditions that would be triggered. And then where the deficiency is found, you would require them to, you know, correct them within a certain period of days. But yes, there's no real recourse for us if it's not a CAF, right? If it's a MARC or it's a private residence, if we were to do an inspection, I mean, at most we would be able to produce a report. We'd be able to link the participant with maybe some advocacy groups or legal aid in the community that, you know, if there was support needed with either taking the landlord to court or what have you, there would be some support there and there would be a documentation.
Okay, that's helpful, because I think with HCVs, if it fails inspection and the landlord doesn't remedy it, they lose the voucher essentially. Like, they're not allowed to live in that unit anymore after, if it's not remedied.
The participant doesn't lose the voucher, though the payment to the landlord is abated. Yeah.
But if they have to vacate that unit essentially, right? If it doesn't meet the housing quality standards, essentially they're not allowed to have the voucher at that property anymore, correct, for housing choice vouchers?
I mean, it depends. You could have a deficiency and then there's a time to cure. And I think that's a conversation between the inspector and then the property owner. I mean, some things like, you know, door frames, and if there are back orders, if there is a plan in place that I've ordered the door frame and it's going to take a couple months, then obviously that property would be under a watch for the duration of sort of the corrective action period, up until a point where, you know, the programmer or the inspector could say, you know, we will no longer pay for the conditions of the property, and so therefore then they would abate the rent.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to understand how this would operate for housing grants. Like, what if it would be parallel to what happens for housing choice vouchers, or if it would be using the same standards but a different process. And it sounds like it would be a different process. For CAF recipients, would there be teeth associated with it then, that if deficiencies are found, then the CAF operator would have to make those, would have to remedy the situation?
Yeah. Based on their affordability agreement with the county, depending on the age of when that agreement was executed, because, you know, we've beefed up the language there, I believe. But yeah, if it's a CAF, there's deficiencies, then the housing division can speak to what those compliance deficiencies would look like.
Okay, other questions from folks?
Got a couple. Just a couple of short questions. It was mentioned that there's 100 to 150 up to 100 to 150 applications for housing grants per month. What percentage of those are actually eligible to receive a grant based on the eligibility criteria? Or basically like on a year on average, would you say are actually eligible to receive a grant?
That's a very good question. I don't have those stats with me, but I can get them and return them to
Okay, great. And
Alex.
just following up on that, for the recommendations to increase the eligibility, I presume that for every recommended increase in eligibility, there's also a corollary increase in funding for that eligibility, because I presume if you increase the eligibility a lot, but don't increase the funding, that you're essentially saying, hey, you're eligible, but now we're opening up the eligibility, your percentage likelihood to get that grant goes down because you open the pool. Is that correct?
I mean, that would be one of the trade-offs I think that the county board and the county manager would be looking at, right? As you expand eligibility, there's that budget allocation. And so if you take, for example, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, the federal program from HUD, you know, there's a budget allocation and then there's a set number. And so once you reach that set number, you have a closed program. So you stop taking applications and they're only available upon turnover. And I think that might be a risk in terms of expenses, that the larger the program, the more expensive, it could end up leading to a closed program. And I think that is also referenced in the report, that at one point in time where you have maybe a budget crunch year, and you have to curb spending, there were limits set on the housing grant program, and then there was a wait list, and that sort of shrinks the ability for inflow at all.
Awesome. And then just last question, is there any, so for people, once they do get a voucher, some tracking on the time it takes to receive the voucher, to get grant to receive, become eligible, and then find their appropriate housing. And then there's their, I know, like, you know, for, is there like a vacancy rate, you know, estimate or that's available to say like, okay, on eligible properties that are, you know, like, I mean, CAF's eligible, or is that like hard to calculate because it depends, right, based on AMI levels and what's the funding? But is there a way to like sort of see like what's available and like, you know, if we want to increase the amount of housing grants, but there's only, you know, how do we kind of work with that?
I think I got lost in the question. I'm sorry.
Jason, are you asking, looking at current CAF residents, how many would be eligible for housing grants but are currently not getting a housing grant?
No, so I in the survey, I think one of the things was saying that once they've received the grant, they have trouble finding the housing appropriate to their household size, or, you know, what I guess, I mean, I don't know, you know, are there like the newer CAFs like go really quickly and then the older ones are not, as they stay available longer? I just would love to maybe see any more statistics on what, you know, versus like right now, if you're saying there are statistics in Arlington, what is the vacancy rate? Okay, it's 5% are vacant, you know, but that's like market rate. But so what are like eligible I guess it's CAFs, because 97% of housing grants or CAFs are available at any given time for someone to be able to find a unit once they get the grant.
I feel like that's probably more.
So yeah, I can speak a little to it. So the amount of CAFs that we have available changes. We do publish a list of the available CAFs each month, and that's what actually Alice referenced earlier with the large amount of Barcroft CAFs that were available on that list. So we do have that available, and obviously the housing grants would work there. To your point about new construction versus kind of older CAFs, there's a very big difference. Ballston Station, which is the project that's leasing up in the next month, right across from the metro, there's 144 units, and we found out that there's like 1,700 applications on the wait list. So like new construction is, yeah, the demand is absolutely overwhelming. But then, as we see, there are available CAFs at Barcroft and around the county and other areas. So it really does vary. I would say usually most of our CAFs that the county is aware of are filled, very large percentage. Yeah, there is that one Barcroft thing that we're looking into though.
So 1,700, can y'all tell if it's for people who are living in a CAF now, they just want to transfer?
So I don't have any of the data on that. I know that I'm sure that it's both. It's a mixture of people who are looking to get into a CAF and people who are probably looking to move from an older CAF into a newer CAF. That was just some nuggets we were provided on with a tour we went on this week. But yeah, demand is very high. Of course, that building is right across from the Boston Metro Station, which obviously increases demand even more.
Yeah. And sometimes people just move out of Arlington. I mean, I've had that with people. I don't do a lot of rental, but every once in a while, some huge family, family of 8, and they just cannot find a home big enough there with the resources from Arlington County, and they end up having to go elsewhere. I mean, that's not very usual, but they show up at my doorstep, and I'm like, oh, sorry.
And I have another question as far as the requirements. There's a growing number, I've seen it on several news stations, of individuals who don't quite fit that category. They call, the news people label them as the working homeless, like they work, they make a certain amount of money, but they are homeless. Is there any room to include them in that and the talks of housing, and not exclude them because they make too much? Or is that something that you're looking into, trying to help out that particular middle missing population of individuals who actually do work but can't afford housing, but they make too much for, it's a population that's being missed. So I'm just trying to figure out, what is the county doing for that particular population?
Nicole, I don't know if you want to take this. I don't want to cut you off, but I think typically that population tends to be served in some of the other rental assistance programs that Nicole highlighted at the beginning of the presentation. And they're not necessarily ongoing rental assistance programs, but rather, short-term or medium-term assistance programs that kind of help people make that transition, particularly if they are homeless and they're transitioning from a homeless shelter into housing of their own. And depending on the program, they might receive, somewhere around 24 or 36 months of assistance. And then hopefully at that point, they'll have gotten, stabilized and able to, pay for their rent on their own, unless, of course, they're meeting one of the either existing categories or perhaps a future category in the housing grants program or the permanent supportive housing program. But I do hear what you're saying, and there is not specifically a category either existing or even proposed at this point for households that don't have minor children, that don't have a disability or some sort of behavioral health care diagnosis, and are not seniors 65 and older. I don't know if there's more you want to say, Nicole.
Only that, most rental assistance subsidy programs that are offered state, even federal level, really that marker of 50% area median income is consistent across the board. So unfortunately, if you do have sort of working poor or working homeless that are over income, they're not necessarily prioritized for these low income, extremely low income subsidies.
I think maybe to your point, I think there's 1,500 people that give the grant, which will get, like, let's say they have a below 30% AMI, that will get them to that 50% AMI to bridge the gap. But then they couldn't, someone that is above that threshold, they could still live in a cap, right? Like a 60% AMI cap. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? So they just won't receive any. They're just receiving the subsidy based on the cap that's already been there based on
the rent burden. Yeah. Well, and if you look at the numbers, I know the Arlington Community Foundation estimated that the number of households that are 30% of AMI or less in Arlington is like 10,000, over 10,000. And we have 8,500 caps.
11,213.
There we go. And we have 1,500 housing grants and about 1,500 housing choice vouchers. And we know that not everyone in a CAF is in that 30%. So like there's huge unmet need in all these programs. Like there's single people or people who don't have kids who are unserved by the housing grant program. That was one of the things I brought up in the focus group, was like, let's expand it to all the people just who meet the income threshold. And for obvious reasons, the county did not make that recommendation because I don't know what that number would have been, but it would have been quite high. But yeah, there's huge unmet need. It's just they're trying to balance, like, how do we narrow it down to the most at need folks, because there's limited resources. But yeah,
you're homeless, you're at need, and it's kind of disheartening that we pay into a system and you can't even benefit from it as anyone
but
else.
we are ending homelessness in 4 years, right, Nicole?
Yeah, you just got to be in the street for 4 years.
Within 4 years, so it could be earlier. But that is the plan. Or functionally ending homelessness, which will still be homeless, but the system will prevent them from staying homeless and then becoming homeless again. Other questions about the housing grant study?
Doris has a question.
Oh, go ahead, Doris.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about a couple of things, because they actually, I was participating in a focus group on. I was participating in a focus group on this with disability community organizations, and so this came up. A couple of these things came up. So the one thing is, could you explain or describe, you say, the eligibility criteria for people with disabilities is that you're totally and permanently disabled. How do you define totally and permanently disabled? And then I have another question regarding residency.
I'm pulling up I don't have the list on the top of my head, but in the administrative regulations, there are a list of disability related benefits and incomes that will qualify you totally permanently disabled. I can't find it right now. I'm sorry.
So they're using disability-related programs, like, for example, maybe Social Security, SSI, and SSDI. Is that what it is?
And other, disability-related benefits. So anything like the inability to work and earn income.
Okay, so if you are an individual, a low-income individual, and you, you don't have much income, so you come to Arlington to take a job, an entry-level job or something, right? and your income is going to be limited, so you have you meet the eligibility criteria in terms of income. You might not be eligible for the program if you're not receiving a quote official disability benefit based on inability to work, because you might be taking a job, you might be a youth with disabilities.
You could qualify under either a totally permanently disabled, right, which would require some vetting of benefits or disability benefits that, you know, the applicant would receive. The other classification for disabled is if you're active and connected to our behavioral health program. So if you could be disabled, you could be working, and you could still be under income and be disabled. But if you're connected with a caseworker through behavioral health, you could also qualify for housing grant.
So it's only applicable to people with mental health disabilities and not people with physical and sensory disabilities, which is of concern.
Behavioral, developmental disabilities, it could be it's substance use disorders. If you're connected to the Department of Human Services.
I get that. But okay. I'm talking about now the people with physical or sensory disabilities, or maybe even learning disabilities that are not, you know, behavioral, or it's just of concern to me, unless you're in. So what if I was in I had Social Security benefits, but I was in the work incentives program? Would I be eligible? And I had a job using work incentives. So I was getting some income, and I was not permanently totally disabled from working, except that I was still receiving maybe Social Security. So that might make me eligible, right?
If they're disability benefits related to Social Security, I mean, I'd have to take this question back.
Okay, some people in the Social Security program, they are in the program, but they're only continuing to receive benefits from the program while they're in a trial work period or something like that, but they're proving that they can work. So I'm just concerned about the interpretation, but they might still be receiving Social Security benefits at that point. And some people actually can work for a very long time utilizing the Social Security work incentives, but their income might, you know, they might be income eligible, but they would be excluded as a person with a disability. That's what I'm afraid of. But I want to get on. I don't know. I think you need to think about what the term permanently and totally disabled means, because it kind of smacks of the eligibility requirements for the real estate exemption program, and I don't think that rental assistance is necessarily that kind of thing. I'm wondering though, also in our focus group on disability, almost everybody in that group recommended that the residency requirement, 90 days living in Arlington, be exempted, that there be an exemption for people with disabilities, because many low-income people who are actually in the Social Security program and are trying to get their first job, many youth, for example, and get offered a job here in Arlington, federal government, contractors, whoever, they need to come and have a place to live and in order to take the job, and they want to come here because of the wealth of transportation resources here in Arlington, which helps people with disabilities who don't drive. And for all of those reasons, we've all worked with some people who were trying to, relocate to Arlington to take a job, and they were low income and receiving Social Security benefits, but they wouldn't. But if they wouldn't have the income to come here and pay for rent for some place for 90 days, particularly if they can't take their job until they get here. And so we recommended in that focus group that the residency requirement be modified, but I didn't hear that in one of the recommendations for changes.
So Doris, all great feedback and input. And that's why we're going to continue to do sort of these, input outreach sessions of where we've landed thus far based on the recommendations and the focus groups that we've received. If it did not make sort of the recommendation list, there's still an opportunity to continue to send questions and feedback, which is appended to the presentation. So I would encourage continue to send in, and I think we'll be before your commission in another time, to the Housing Grant Study at arlingtonva.us.
And the last thing I want to ask you about is there was something that you said about a policy that you had thought may come up or be included regarding accommodations similar to the Housing Choice Voucher Program for people with disabilities. It might have been the increase in counting, giving you an increase in the amount of your subsidy, or I forget this. There's another one. Oh, extra time to find when you're looking for a property to take your voucher, because you might be looking for accessible housing. It might take longer for you to find a unit that you need. So HUD allows an accommodation for extra time to search. Is that what you're saying that you are recommending for this program?
That wasn't included in the recommendations that we reviewed. Typically, households have 90 days from receipt of application to get all their documentation to the housing grant staff. And, if perhaps, there's occasionally a need for an expansion of that 90-day time frame for a reason like what you're describing, that's something that we can always talk about and perhaps grant. The 90-day rule is not hard and fast in every situation. So
it's not there. I thought you said it was. And the only
no.
last thing I wanted to ask is, if I am a person with a disability or a senior who is for some reason had to was discharged from a hospital or someplace and was in a nursing home. And in Arlington, this happens all the time. So what happens is, if they don't have beds, like Medicaid beds, for example, in an Arlington nursing home, one is sent out of the county, primarily either to Alexandria or Fairfax, maybe to Loudoun, or perhaps somewhere else. But is somebody in a nursing home whose last permanent address was Arlington, would they be considered for the housing grant program without a current residency requirement? because that's one of the last, the housing grant could be used for nursing home transition by low income and extremely low income people with disabilities.
So are you saying they're like temporarily in a nursing home out of county and they're trying to come back to the
Well, they could have
county
been
after
there a
discharge?
long time, but they could have been there a long time, but nobody ever approached them or informed them until, say, even right now. But nobody ever approached them and informed them that they had the right under the Americans with Disabilities Act to receive their services in the community and come back to Arlington. The Medicaid program just places you where there's a bed. It's kind of similar to state mental health hospitals, but it's used very regularly to place people, out of county for sure.
Right. So your question is if they were previously in Arlington before residing in a nursing home out of Arlington, if they would be considered an Arlington resident if they wanted to come back to Arlington for housing grants
utilizing
purposes?
the housing grant, yes.
Nicole, do you know the answer?
Doris, I think we're gonna.
That's the last question. That's the last question.
Yeah, I think Nicole, if you're able to get back to Doris with the additional information about this, and I know you said you're going to be presenting in front of the Disability Commission as well. That would be great. I know we're over time, and I did have one last question just about the process for the report. So I know this is the informational brief for us, and this is the draft report. Are you guys going to be coming back with a final report? Or what is the plan, if there is one for that?
I don't know that we're going to be coming back to all the commissions with the final report. I think we'll be aggregating feedback that we receive both in these settings and then via email and in the community information sessions, and sharing that feedback with the county manager and the county board prior to having a final report. But I don't know that at this point in time we're planning to come back and do additional presentations.
Okay, thank you. We can figure it. I think at some point I'd like the commission to weigh into the board on, our thoughts on the report. So at least if we can just sync up on the timing of when you guys finalize that, so that we can take action. But thank you so much for the presentation and all the work that went into this report. I'm super excited to learn about the long ago history. So if you guys are able to include that in any updates to the report, that'd be great to learn more about the 1970s and whatever. But yeah, thank you again for answering questions and putting all this together. I think they're great recommendations. And it's a great program. It helps a lot of people and it's super unique. Okay, next item on the agenda, we're going to skip the new commission orientation presentation. We'll come back to that in another meeting. And we'll just finish up with the development updates and then quick subcommittee liaison reports.
Okay, so I have 2 updates on development updates today, other than the sheet that was sent out. Okay, so the first one that you're gonna see likely on the consent agenda for the county board next week has to do with the Haven Amendment. That was a project that we heard back in December of 2022, but the county board approved a use permit to allow the conservation of the Haven's apartments under the Columbia Heights Neighborhood Form-Based Code and certified the transfer of development rights to transfer density from the property to the Ballston Macy's site. Condition number 2 of the use permit required that basically that the units be delivered by the last day of April 2024. Given that the recordation of the deed of declaration of restrictive covenants for the CAF agreement on the Haven site is inextricably linked to the development of the Ballston Macy's site, the proposed amendments to condition 2 will allow 2 additional years of flexibility for the deed to be recorded. However, The amended language also requires that the deed be recorded prior to the issuance of the footing to grade permit. So it's really whatever is first, the footing to grade permit at the Macy's site or the last day of April 2026. There's the recordation of a deed of declaration of restrictive covenants is the mechanism by which the CAFs are required. The additional edits to condition number 2 clarify the timing is tied to the date of recordation of the deed. The proposed changes remain within the spirit and intent of the county board's approval of the use permit and associated Ballston Macy's site plan. So staff is going to recommend that the county board approve the subject use permit amendment in accordance with condition number 2. So it's basically Insight Property was the group that had brought forward the Macy's project at the same time as the Haven. It was a little bit of a complicated process because there was a transfer of density. Basically, Insight isn't ready to develop the Macy's site yet. They want some more time to close on that land. The intent was for when they close on the Macy's land to provide the CAFs. So what we're doing is basically giving 2 more years for them to close on that land. But when they do, those CAFs need to be, that conversion period needs to begin. So that will be on the county board agenda next week. If there's no questions on that, I also have one quick Barcroft update.
It was super simple and straightforward. I caught everything. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very technical little thing, but basically the
Haven, 2 more years.
The Haven units will probably take 2 more years, and it's all tied to the Ballston Macy's. Yeah, yeah.
They still have their things.
It's like massive now.
Yeah.
Massive sales.
I think they're preparing to.
Everything.
Yeah. And then so that's going forward on the consent agenda as well as a Barcroft item. So the financing commitment letter and term sheet for the first renovation phase of Barcroft Apartments, including 93 units, was approved at the December 23 county board meeting. In order to assist finance closing, Jair Lynch is requesting approval and reservation of Industrial Development Authority bonds. This request will be considered as part of the March County Board consent agenda. So basically they're looking for approval for IDA bonds, which is also going to be on the consent agenda. It's a pretty standard practice that a number of our projects have used in the past. So those are just 2 housing items that you'll see on the consent agenda for the county board next week.
And sorry, those bonds are a source from like what sort of bonds are they? Industrial developments?
Yeah, so it's actually Arlington County Industrial Development Authority.
It's a secretive commission, a body that I don't know who's on it, but they have a lot of power, I guess, that give out these bonds.
Yeah, yeah, it's not very well known about, but affordable housing is able to leverage industrial development bonds to make some projects work, and that's what basically staff is asking the county board to include the ability to
authorize that.
Authorize
the county provided bond.
Right. Yeah. So I guess I think there's a meeting with the IDA the week before the county board where they approve and then it goes to the county board. But yeah, it's basically just a little financing mechanism.
I assume that was in the Barcroft plan that they're going to use this, like of all the different financing, this is part of the thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Barcroft plan was let's use all the tools at our disposal possible, and this is one of them. And then other than that, there's happy to answer any questions on the development updates.
And it looks like we still need a rep for the Crystal City block plan, SPRC.
Yeah, so there are a few coming up that we could use people for. Crystal City Block Plan W, March 14th, so that's next Thursday. There's the 12th Street Landing, which we don't have anyone for.
Do we have any volunteers? People online or here?
Sarah has her hand up.
Yeah, I can do. Well, I can do either one of those, like Crystal City Block or the 12th Street Landing.
Okay, want me to put you down for?
Let me just look at my calendar. I changed my stuff around. I can't find anything. Shoot.
I should be able to do the first one.
Okay.
The 12th Street Landing, LRPC.
Yeah, I can do the March 14th one.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we're at least covered on those next two. And then we didn't have on the agenda, there's the NSTA site, which is the site down there with Roadside and Il Radicchio and the NSTA building, which is the National Science Teachers Association. So there was an SPRC on February 22nd, but they didn't, that wasn't the one where they were talking about community benefits. The next one that's coming up is the one where they will talk about housing. I don't believe that date's been published yet. Obviously I'll circulate it when it is, but that's one of the next few site plans that we'll hear.
Okay. Karen, did you have a particular interest in that one?
I mean, is it virtual or is it?
You can do virtual.
I mean, I can do that if it, but you have a date.
Yeah, okay.
Sounds good. Was that it for development?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. For subcommittee, liaison reports and homeownership subcommittee, any news?
Nothing has changed. We're still up in the air.
Okay. Our CISAC representative is not here. We don't have one for
So we still don't have one for HALRB or the CSB. To be honest, I'm not sure how much our projects really intersect with CSB right now. HALRB, I think the Barcroft piece is maybe deserving of having a representative, considering that a lot of those projects will have to go through the HALRB. So if anyone is interested in that one, I think that's the big one, and then
fighting a good fight with the historic preservation folks.
What is the CSB stand?
Community Services Board, mental health.
Yeah. Okay. Well, can you send out another email just
with the openings? Yeah. Yeah.
And what is the next meeting with me? What is the next meeting for the county board?
Next Saturday, so not the 19th, but
something.
16th.
Yeah.
Let me check real quick.
While you check, any update on C2E2?
Yeah, so CTU2 stands for the Climate Change, Energy, and the Environment Commission. And so I've been in contact with their chair, Joan McIntyre, as well as with Kellen, and we are interested in doing some more collaboration, specifically doing some sort of exploratory committee about sort of sharing ideas about what kind of policies would intersect between climate and housing to be able to share with our commission. So please let me know if anyone is interested in participating in those. We might do like quarterly meetings. Yeah, let me know.
We could have one other person from the Housing Commission participating in that. Because of the.
We could rotate too, right? Like
yeah.
A group that we trade off. Yeah.
Only 2 housing commissioners can be in any one place at one time.
Yeah, unless we do all the public notices.
I think we might.
Okay, so yeah, if it's an official subcommittee, then right, more could join.
Okay.
Great. Okay. Well, I think meeting adjourned then. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good discussion.
Thank you.
First meeting, it's like.